get started here with my spiel. I'm going to make this hopefully quick and painless for all of you tonight. So again, hi everybody, thanks for joining tonight and welcome to our second volunteer town hall of the year. If we haven't met yet, my name is Elisa Goldstein and I'm one of the fraternity managers, and I'm joined tonight by several management team members and AKSI staff members. So our goal for tonight is to go through a couple of fraternity updates, due dates, and programming. Then we'll have about 15 minutes or so for Q&A, some open discussion, and the last half of tonight's presentation, we're going to turn it over to the Judiciary Committee to talk about the recently updated and approved Code of Conduct. So, if you have any questions as I'm going through the next few slides, please feel free to put them in the chat, or during the Q&A portion, you can open up your mics to speak. Okay. Happy belated Founders Day, everybody. So some technology updates. First, you may have seen or heard, but AKSI has a new accounting system, and with that, a new format for statements. The goal here is to have statements that are easier to understand and read. The statements will now only list transactions on the chapter account that are outstanding, so that is a difference. But as always, if you or the chapters that you work with have questions, the AKSI staff is available to assist. Second, and really exciting update here, coming in just about, I guess, 2.5 weeks, is the chapter spot integration with the My AKSI community. So as of November 2nd, I know I see some happy faces here about that. As of November 2nd, the chapters will be able to perform functions housed in Chapter Spot via the My AKSI community and, of course, the My AKSI app. A tutorial was sent out in the recent Officer and Chapter Advisor newsletter, so if you're looking for more information, you can go there. And it will be available in this PowerPoint, which will be uploaded to the event as of tomorrow. So just two exciting updates there. Does anybody have any questions? And I'm just going to, any questions? I don't see any in the chat. Okay. So with that, big updates here, and a lot of due dates and events going on in the next few weeks, as well as exciting programming. So of course, I want to go through a couple of standard due dates that are listed on here, which I'm sure many, if not all of you, are already aware of, like pledge fees and reporting, the payment of student member dues and insurance, roster updates, and the bridge syllabus. That's going to be annoying. So additionally, I want to draw your attention to the due date on here for the Diversity, Equality, and Inclusion Survey. This email, there was an email that was sent out last week by the chair of the Alpha Kappa Psi Board of Directors, Eileen Howell. This anonymous survey is geared toward learning about experiences in our fraternity in order to grow and improve. So please make sure that you're taking this survey, the students that you work with are taking this survey, any brothers you know are taking the survey. Doesn't matter if these brothers have been involved as volunteers recently or not. Now's the time to really reach out to your network and get all of the brothers that you know as far as you can reach to take this survey. It really does take only about 15 minutes. I took it the other day. Pretty painless in that regard. And if it is enticing to anybody, particularly the students, there is a Visa gift card giveaway after completing the survey. The due date is coming up quick. It's next Thursday, October 22nd. So don't let it sit in your inbox too long. Make sure you just click on it, take it, and we appreciate it. Then, as far as due dates go, I want to remind everybody about some more ongoing due dates. Like we have an open call for virtual presenter applications, as well as the ongoing due date to complete volunteer learning plans that are available in the MyAKSI community with chapter advisor and section director monthly topics to review and complete. Like the last town hall, the name of the game is the MyAKSI community, so if I mention anything and you don't know where to find it, that's probably your first and best bet. On the event side, there are a lot of great speakers and learning opportunities coming up in the next month. To call out a few, there is an event coming up on how students can best represent and market themselves to their campus community, which is being held on October 21st with management team members Diana and Heather. Then, of course, there is the Institute of Business Leadership that's going to be held on November 5th with virtual sessions throughout the day. More information on that event is coming soon, and as a reminder, please encourage your student chapters to attend this event because registration is free for all student dues-paying members as part of Brotherhood Unbounded in lieu of an in-person PBLI, which unfortunately, as we know, will not be held this year. If you are keeping tabs on me, I did skip over a couple of due dates and events like personal accountability session and Birkman topics because we're going to go into those on some upcoming slides. In the meantime, if you have any questions on these events or due dates, I think I see a couple in here in the chat. Okay, it looks like Chrissy, thank you for answering Craig's question. Any other questions on events or due dates? You guys are old pros at this. Okay. So the next thing that I want to cover is the Birkman Assessment. So an email went out on Monday regarding the Birkman method, which is one of the top personality assessment tools used by companies and is now being made available to dues-paying Alpha Kappa Psi collegiate members as a benefit. The goal here is for students to learn about themselves and their leadership style in order to better understand how their chapter works and affect change in their chapter. With that, the students can actually now start taking the Birkman questionnaire by, of course, logging into the MyAKSI community, and it's found under the My Learning section in the MyAKSI tab. It takes about 30 minutes to complete. It's not that long or difficult, and the results are available immediately. That being said, we are encouraging students to take the Birkman by Birkman Day, which will be on October 25th. And then register and attend the Getting to Know Your Birkman Results session on October 28th. In addition, the chapters will be able to have Birkman facilitators deliver specific sessions to chapters on one of 4 key reports. These sessions will start in November, and as a volunteer, you can apply to become a Birkman facilitator. The application can be found in Volunteer Central in the MyAKSI community. Again, this is a great resource for our students, and it's coming again as part of Brotherhood Unbounded to offer students programming that enables them to get the most out of their AKSI experience, even virtually. And let's see, do we have any questions on the Birkman? Seeing no questions, I'm going to move on to virtual awards. Hopefully this isn't too late. You're not all asleep over there. So virtual awards, an AKSI Awards and Recognition Night is being held on November 18th. Right now, chapters can enter submissions for virtual chapter award categories, including recruitment campaign, service, brotherhood, fundraising, professional development, and alumni engagement. An email was sent out with the link to the application, and it's due on November 1st. Or if you have any questions, the student services team, I'm sure, can provide you that link. With that, these awards will be presented on November 18th along with the 2019-2020 Outstanding Chapter Performing or Programming and Outstanding Chapter Leader Awards. I believe there's also going to be an announcement about who won the Brainy Money Side Hustle scholarships that evening. All fall submissions will also be entered into the running for awards presented at convention in Miami. Any questions on virtual awards? Any questions at all? This is now your open forum time. So if you have questions on experiences that you're seeing with your chapters and students, if you want to share any best practices, we just wanted to open up the next 15 or so minutes to that discussion. In the future, we are planning to have more of like a breakout room session with these volunteer town halls in order to discuss specific topics. But that'll be something that's coming with the November town hall. So don't let me be the only one to speak tonight.
I have a question.
Yes.
Good work, Alyssa. Nice coverage.
A one-woman show here tonight.
Yeah. So you said the Birkman takes about 30 minutes, but unless I'm slow, which is very possible, when we did this for FAC, it took me like closer to 90 minutes. Is it a different something that we did, or am I just slow?
I mean, I'm seeing Jason shaking his head, so I'm assuming that means it's the same thing. I think it probably just depends on how quick you read and how familiar you are with taking some of these assessments. Like I know at my office, we've done other things like this, so I feel like I'm that New York mentality of a fast clicker, but I think 30 minutes is where they ballparked it, but obviously it could take longer. And then I'm seeing a question in the chat, which maybe somebody from the staff can answer, about more detail on the responsibilities and role of the Birkman facilitators.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that. I was trying to type it out and I just didn't get there. But what I was going to say is that once you submit your interest, we will be hosting a kind of a two-part virtual training for facilitators. One is, the first part is the getting to know your Birkman results session. So we would ask that you attend that. And then the second one is a training session on being a facilitator and whatnot. And then Plaid's the company who administers the Birkman. They are creating facilitator guides for all of our facilitators to then use and walk through the content with chapters. The intent would be the chapter takes the Birkman and they want to host a particular session on, let's say, building trust. And so they would be able to reach out to the Birkman facilitators in the Volunteer Central and say, hey, I'm looking for this program on building trust. And then they would connect that way with a potential facilitator in the chapter. So we're going to try and use Volunteer Central to make those connections between chapters and facilitators.
Hey, Jason, for those that didn't take the Birkman assessment, can you kind of share like high level overview of the reports that we should see, that we're expected to see, so that we have understanding of the Birkman assessment in general?
Yeah, so at a very high level, the most immediate reports, I think there's 7 reports that will be made available from basic information about yourself to what your leadership style is to leadership map, I think it is, your Birkman style, and there's a couple of others, but basically it's going to go over 4 different content areas that are basically like your needs, your wants, your stress behaviors, your usual behaviors, how you interact with others, how others can communicate with you, things like that. And so it will be very helpful with a chapter from the perspective of as a as a officer group to know how they can work together, and then also how members in their chapter want to be communicated with or treated and whatnot from there. So, and then we'll be releasing other reports as we move on throughout the course of the year. So there's career-related reports, there's financial-related reports. I think there's one called Money and Trust. So there's a couple of other series of reports that we'll be able to release as the year goes on.
And Jason, there's a question in the chat. If someone took the survey at for FAC, is there a way to get the results again?
Yes, if you took the survey, you should be able to log into the community and still log into the Birkman to get your results. If you are having troubles with that, please let me know so that we can work through that. But anyone who took the Birkman previously, student or alumnus, has access to their results through our system.
Other questions? Anybody want to share any best practices that they've seen, especially with virtual, everything, life, chapter operations? If not, I will turn it over to the Judiciary Committee a few minutes early. So I just, again, wanted to thank everybody for coming out tonight. This is going to be a little bit more of a non-traditional town hall, although being our second one, what's to say what's traditional? But going forward, we are looking to have these a couple of times a semester. So our next one will be in November, and after that, we'll pick up in the spring semester. For the November one, which will be held on the 10th, you can already start to register online. We are going to create breakout rooms and do some discussion on there. So hopefully you'll be able to join us. But with that, the rest of the evening, I am going to turn it over and I want to introduce Christian, the chair of the Judiciary Committee, Carrie, the vice chair of the Judiciary Committee, and Melinda, the director of Student Services. We're going to talk more about the Code of Conduct and the upcoming Personal Accountability and Responsibility Conduct discussion.
Hey everyone. Alyssa, can you give me a thumbs up? Can you hear me? Awesome. So if I haven't met you yet, my name is Christian Nuccio. I'm the chair of Alpha Kappa Psi's Judiciary Committee. Melinda, in a second, is going to be pulling up our slides, and we'll go ahead and go through a recent kind of major change we've had at the fraternity level with the Code of Conduct. So yeah, what I want to do very quickly, because there are certainly some people on this call that I haven't met yet or Carrie hasn't met yet, is our second slide just has pictures of our great faces, just so you know who we are. If we haven't interacted with you yet, the Judiciary Committee, we work at the fraternity level on policy issues, but a lot of what we do is focused on disciplinary hearings and understanding member conduct. And so at any time, you can feel free to reach out to us. We have generic inboxes, so jcchair@akpsi.org and jcvicechair@akpsi.org. That way we can transition people through. But if you ever have any questions, certainly your regional directors and any member of the staff know how to get a hold of us, and we're more than happy to provide clarification or advice on anything that's going on inside your chapter. Linda, do you mind skipping to the third slide? That's us. Okay, so today what we're going to do is talk about the recently created and published Alpha Kappa Psi Code of Conduct. We'll talk a little bit about why it came into effect, and then we'll end it with an implementation plan on kind of how we plan to roll this out. And I'll say, Carrie, at any time, Carrie and I usually have pretty synced up brains, but if I'm missing something or you have something to add, please don't hesitate to cut in and let me know. So on this next slide, what you'll see is kind of some of the things that drove this Code of Conduct. So Previously, prior to this document being published, most of the conduct policies for Alpha Kappa Psi were devoted to risk management policies. So we had things like alcohol and drugs, hazing, sexual misconduct, publication of inappropriate materials, and then safety violations. And then everything else that you could do that was wrong was covered underneath this blanket clause that was the gross improper conduct clause, which is derived from the Constitution. And that just meant when you were doing things that you shouldn't be doing. Over the past 3 years, the Judiciary Committee and the management team and the staff and the board of directors have all been looking at how do we better reflect our values, our core values, when it comes to holding members accountable, but also letting them know what our expectations are. And so this is kind of the brainchild of, and I'm thrilled she's on the call, but Liz and Melinda on pulling in a whole bunch of information from other organizations on how do they do this, and then kind of getting together a framework on how we can move forward on creating our own document. And so what we did, if you'll go to, let's see, yeah, if you'll go to this next slide, Melinda, is we kind of modified the way that the fraternity documents are written. So if you don't mind, yeah, going back to that, just that conduct policy and disciplinary procedure slide. So the board of directors, just very quickly on the structure so everybody knows, the board of directors statement of policy used to house everything that we expected members to do when it came to risk management. And then we had a second document, which was called the JC operating procedures. And that was how we do disciplinary hearings. What we've done is we've pulled both those documents out of their original sources and combined them to create one code of conduct. So this is now a one-stop shop for any member to understand what's expected of me, what are the rules inside the organization, and what happens if I fail to follow the rules. And it's also a great one-stop shop for volunteers, because this will, again, help you understand what you're supposed to be teaching your members when it comes to conduct, but also how to react if there's some sort of conduct violation, or if you're not sure if a conduct violation has occurred. And so what you're looking at here are the two parts to the code of conduct. With the publication of this document, which occurred this week, we're no longer using the term risk management policies. So those terms will go away, and instead we'll just use the term conduct policies, because we don't want to differentiate between what an individual does on kind of like when it pertains to themselves and what they do when it impacts our organization. Because for the most part, those are one and the same thing. So from now on, everything is just member conduct underneath the code of conduct. So Melinda, if you'll go to this next slide. This next slide is going to show you what part one looks like inside that code of conduct. And you'll see the white thing, the items that are highlighted in white, those are things that haven't changed or have changed very minimally. So alcohol and drugs, hazing, publication of inappropriate materials, and scavenger hunt. What we've done is, again, I don't want to give a huge thanks to Liz for this, but we've cleaned up a significant amount of this language. So there's no more overlap on a lot of these terms, and it's stated much more simply for both volunteers and students to understand. So now when you go through, instead of having like 12 different rules, for alcohol, those are down to 8 that are very cleanly stated, and it's easy to understand exactly what we're talking about in there. The other two, so health and fire safety, we've modified to include just general safety. We've also included a provision in there that talks about firearms and explosives. We haven't had any incidents of that, but the Holmes Murphy, our insurance company, recommended strongly that we include that in there. And so that policy essentially says make sure you're following both university and or university policies and ordinances when it comes to handling and using those items. And then the sexual misconduct policy is something I can most certainly talk about at the end of this call. We've made some modifications to that as well. A lot of those are based on legal recommendations and insurance recommendations, but they're also based on a trend we've seen recently on incidents that are reported to us either privately or publicly, and how the fraternities is expected to respond to those. So instead of giving individual guidance to each member on how we respond to those, we now have it codified on the blanket policy of how we respond to sexual misconduct allegations. Then the last part, which is the part I'm going to spend the most time talking about today, is the general conduct policy, and you'll see that on the left side. And the general conduct policy has 3 pieces underneath it. It's got a conduct policy for everybody, And then it's got some items that are specific to volunteers and specific to alumni. And so you can see that a lot of people on this call, all 3 of those will pertain to you, whereas alumni, only 2 of them will pertain to them, and students, only the everyone clause will pertain to them. Melinda, if you'll go to the next slide. I appreciate it. So what I want to do very quickly is just, I've taken out the most important part of these conduct policies, and I'm very quickly going to go through all of them, just so we're all on the same page, and if there are any questions, we have the opportunity to answer them now. And these are very important because some of these are a major change to what members are used to seeing, because they haven't seen anything like this before. So this first one up here is kind of our catch-all one that talks about engaging in conduct or activity that raises questions to the fraternity's integrity, honor, reputation, or can cause embarrassment to the fraternity. So what does this mean? Very often we've received reports of members doing things, a lot of illegal activity specifically, that they've been charged and convicted of that doesn't fall underneath our policies at all, but most certainly embarrasses our organization. Prior to having this in, we had a way of handling that. It was kind of a circuitous way. Now we have a specific way to handle conduct which is embarrassing to the organization or demonstrates significant failures in integrity or honor. Another example I can give is cheating on the fraternity exam, which we regularly get reports of. There wasn't really and this isn't a knock against our policies, it's just there wasn't really a policy that specifically addressed integrity or honor, and there is now a policy in our conduct that talks about our expectation that you maintain those values. The next one talks about conducting activities in full compliance with laws, university requirements, fraternity policies, and governing documents, and directives from fraternity leaders. So this has a couple of components. The biggest one we want to take away from here is what we used to do is break out each thing you could do wrong and say, so like alcohol, hey, with alcohol, you can't violate university policies. With hazing, you can't violate university policies. With safety, you can't violate university policies. And that created like a lot of words that didn't need to be there. So we can kind of summarize all of that as just saying, follow university policies. And that cleans up a lot of the rules and makes it easier for people to understand. Then there's another piece in there at the bottom that talks about directives from fraternity leaders. And this not only was recommended by the management team, but is really put in there for the management team. This gives you all a little bit more authority when you're interacting with your specific chapters, because there now is a codified expectation that if you give your chapter that falls underneath your region direction on something they have to do, there's an expectation that they follow that. And if they fail to follow that, that's not complying with our expected code of conduct for members. You can go to the next one, Melinda. So this one's a pretty easy one. This is actually in reaction to some things that have happened in the past. So we have an expectation that not only do you pay your bills and invoices, but you care for property as well. So, chapters who rent a facility like a cabin and trash that cabin, that's not okay, doesn't fall within our policies, and there's something specifically in there about that, even if they paid their bill for it. The next one here is specific to the Judiciary Committee, which is about refraining from abusing or interfering with our conduct and discipline process. In the past, because we have very intelligent students, and I don't want to take anything away from them, but they most certainly find ways to interpret our rules differently than how we interpret our rules. And so that creates a lot of backlog for our organization to work through that. And so very cleanly what we state up front is we have an expectation that everybody follows the same rules that the organization has laid out, and nobody's trying to conspire against the organization or hide things during investigations. That's not compliant with our core values. And then this last one here talks about exercising fiduciary care and responsibility for our funds and assets. And I can be very open on this. I would say, and someone correct me if I'm wrong, but I would say we receive between 2 and 5 cases of embezzlement per year from chapters. And these are simply members who, it can be complex, but generally it's members who take their chapter's debit or credit card and spend it on something that they weren't supposed to spend it on. And we go through the legal process for that, but we now have it written in the conduct policy that they can't do that either. So, my hope is that by kind of laying these all out, this saves you a lot of reading as well. I hope everybody reads the code of conduct, but I recognize that you all have a lot of things that aren't risk management related on your plates as well. These are the big takeaways for everybody in the organization. So it's not just members, or it's not just student members, but it is volunteers and alumni. Anybody who holds the tag of Alpha Kappa Psi are expected to follow these policies here. And so what I'm going to do next is very quickly go to alumni. And this is going to be specific to a lot of the regional directors on this call, because we deal with this a lot as regional directors and as members of the Judiciary Committee. So these are targeted at alumni who are not supportive of the fraternity's policies when they return to chapter events. So this first one here, very simple. We have an expectation that if a student chapter has rules about their event and you're alumni and you're attending that event, you have to follow those rules. So if the student chapter is holding a dry fundraiser, you can't show up drunk. I mean, there are other ones, but that's the one we see the most of. And so that's cleanly written in the policies now. And then the second one here talks about how, and this is kind of, welcome, something we've added in to really help the chapters out. So I don't want to go down a huge road on this, but even this semester, we have chapters who come to us and say, hey, there is a member, an alumni from our organization that does not uphold our values or does things that we really don't appreciate when they come to our events. How can we tell them that we don't want them to come to events anymore? It used to be that the Heritage Center or the Fraternity Center staff would get involved. We would ask a staff member to reach out to that alumni and let them know that, hey, we don't want you coming to events anymore. This code of conduct now instead gives the chapter or volunteers the capability to interact with those members and let them know, hey, we're in control of our events and we're going to set the list on who may and may not attend those events. And that gives them a little bit more control. So for regional directors on this call, this is going to, I think, help in a lot of ways. It's also going to create more dialogue for you. There will certainly be times where alumni are asked not to come to events and they still want to go. Our expectation is that as a regional director, you'll probably receive feedback from that alumni. And so we're going to ask you to kind of be the middleman involved in that to make sure that the chapter and the alumni can resolve those issues and kind of give, I don't want to say final ruling, but kind of give the authoritative stance on what we're looking at when it comes to these individual cases. And then the last thing we'll talk about is code of conduct for volunteers. So this pertains to everybody on this call. These were written in concert with the management team, and I've thanked the staff, but I do want to take some time to thank the management team for all the work they did on this piece specifically. Carrie and I talk about very often that our lenses are kind of shaded up at the Judiciary Committee because we don't really get a lot of good news cases. People don't report good things to the Judiciary Committee. And so for us, what we need to balance is what we see with what realistically occurs in the volunteer world. And so we couldn't do that without a lot of help from Thomas and Jackie and Alyssa specifically, who provided like an overwhelming amount of feedback to us that kind of put us in the right direction to make sure these were guided and meeting what the management team was looking for. So these pertain to all volunteers, but again, kind of guided by the people who are going to deal with these issues the most, which is the management team, the Judiciary Committee, and the Heritage Center staff. So the first one here, maintain professional relationships and distances with members they're advising and leading. So really what we're looking for here is making sure volunteers understand that you can be friends with people that you can be friends with people inside your organization, but when you're executing your authorities as a volunteer, we expect you to be representing the organization when you do that. So you do that free of bias and free of any undue influence, and you're acting as a capable and respectable member of our organization. This next one talks about avoiding the use of your position to seek personal, professional, or financial gain. And this clause is very important. This is kind of the one that ties it together through the inappropriate use of access to members during Alpha Kappa Psi events. So what this means is it's perfectly fine to say in your professional world or on your resume or on your LinkedIn, hey, I volunteer in this capacity as AK Psi. What it's not okay to do is to like rip a student's listserv and use that to promote your business or to go to the to go to convention and hold a session on risk management, and then the last 30 minutes of it are promoting your business, things like that. The fraternity space is meant to develop our members, and it's not meant to help sell products or services from our members or from our volunteers. And so we try to draw that line distinctly between, and again, this comes down to when you're executing your duties as a volunteer, the expectation is your loyalties to the organization when you're doing that, and your obligations to the organization when you're doing that. The next one here talks about refraining from any activity that creates a conflict of interest for the volunteer or the fraternity. So I'll speak kind of directly to this one. So if you have any questions, make sure you contact us. A big one is if the fraternity has its own code of, or its own conflict of interest policy, and all members are expected to follow that. The biggest question that's going to come up is if you're like a regional director and your chapter is a chapter in your organization's hosting an event and they're also using your company to promote that event, there's a difference between like the personal connection, hey, I work for this company and I can set you up with somebody who can cater it or whatever, and you receiving a financial benefit because of your position. And so this is intended to make sure that our volunteers aren't receiving a direct financial benefit from chapters or members as a result of their position. And so, if you have any questions at the end of this, please feel free to let me know. It's hard to kind of go into case-by-case bases, but I can do my best to address any questions that we have about these. Melinda, if you'll go to the next one here. So this one talks about making sure that as a volunteer, you're using financial resources appropriately and not for personal gain. So that's the first piece. And the second thing is that you can't promote yourself or others in elections using fraternity funds. So, in here, what we're talking about is if you are a regional director that's decided to run for president or vice president, you cannot use fraternity funds to visit your chapters, and while you're visiting your chapters, simultaneously campaign for those positions. Those two need to be disconnected completely. If you're using fraternity funds in execution of your duties as a volunteer, though what you do there needs to be limited to the duties that you have in that current position as a volunteer. And then that first piece up there specifically talks about personal gain or frivolous expenditures. So those are actually pretty easy for the organization to find out, and generally this doesn't happen. But it's important to know that our expectation is and this is for the Judiciary Committee, if I'm investigating a chapter at San Antonio, I'm not getting a hotel at the Ritz-Carlton while I'm out there. I am not renting a limousine to get from the hotel to the chapter back and forth. The taxi is just fine for me, things like that. And these are pertaining, it's important to note that these are pertaining to individual members and their conduct. So, when the Heritage Center staff rents a car service to get everybody to and from, that's a cost saving measure. When Christian rents a limousine to get from the Ritz-Carlton to the University of San Antonio for an investigation, that's a frivolous expenditure. And we're trying to prevent those. And then if you'll do this last one here, the last one, which again is very important to everybody on this call, is promptly reporting illegal conduct to the Judiciary Committee or the fraternity staff. And so this one's pretty cut and simple. If a member tells you that something has happened inside that chapter that is illegal, our expectation is that you contact the Judiciary Committee and let us know that you've received that report. I want to point out here that these are the policy highlights. There are other policies that specifically refer to volunteers. It's important that you read the document. These are the big takeaways from there. The rest of the ones that I haven't highlighted in here are ones that either haven't been violated or everybody is generally aware of as regular conduct. Things like we have an expectation that if you're a volunteer, you are executing your duties as a volunteer. And if you're not executing your duties, then you're not meeting our conduct standards as being in those positions. So I do encourage everybody to read over that policy when they get the chance. I want to make sure I don't go over time, so I might be kind of speeding through this. Melinda, if you'll go to this last one here.
Christian,
ahead,
I was going to say there's a question from Chelsea. It says, for those in the nonprofit world, what would be if your chapter chooses an organization to be the benefactor? So something like American Cancer Society or St. Jude's.
Oh yeah, yep, that's a great question. So what we're looking for here is to make sure that volunteers are not benefiting from this. So This is I don't want to deal in hypotheticals, but what I'll say is that's the guiding principle you all should be using. So, for instance, if Chelsea was the CEO of St. Jude's Children's Hospital, I would be concerned if the chapters decided to devote money to St. Jude's without notifying somebody at the board of directors and following our conflict of interest policy that's going on. But if Chelsea just works there and isn't receiving a benefit and is able to provide a business connection, that's a little bit different. And so, what I would provide to you as the rule is, if you're a volunteer and your chapter is looking to donate to your organization, just send us a note at the Judiciary Committee. And it's very simple for us to just say, hey, this meets our requirements, or this is an ethical gray area, and we can get it very quickly resolved by going through the staff. I hope that answers your question. If it doesn't, put something in the box and I'll readdress it. Yep, absolutely. So this last piece here, when we talk about disciplinary procedures, so we've cleaned up the JC disciplinary procedures. And if you can take anything away from this, it's two things. Number one, make sure you read the volunteer portion of the Code of Conduct so you understand what you personally are expected to follow. Number two, read the disciplinary procedures, because these will specifically pertain to how we expect volunteers and regional directors to execute their duties when it comes to discipline. So we made this getting feedback from RDs on what the biggest problems were. And the biggest problems were, when a potential risk management issue happens, I don't know what step one is. So we've written in step one. Step one, if there's a risk management issue, it is in our procedures that the first thing you do is contact the Judiciary Committee, and like our distro. So it'll say the Judiciary Committee staff liaison, which right now is Melinda, but it'll get to all of us. And then from there, it lists very simply, here are the things that happen next. Generally, what happens next is that we ask the regional director a series of questions. So you say, hey, this thing happened at a chapter. So we'll send you some questions back that say, can you do us a favor and just correlate this to the chapter's calendar and see if, on this date when this happened, was there something on their calendar? There are these members like Chris and Dave and John. Can you give us an idea of who those people actually are by looking at their roster? And then can you tell us anything else you know about the chapter and its culture? So questions like that, that'll kind of be phase one. And when we get all that information back, that's when we'll actually start going down the disciplinary route or decide not to. And what this does is this prevents us from opening up an investigation at the very beginning and then drawing a chapter through a year-long investigation, when at the end, we might not have had to do that at all. So we kind of start with this thing we call a preliminary inquiry, where we're just asking general questions to get a feel for what's going on. And hopefully this will help stave off a lot of those very long investigations, because a bulk of the work will be done before the investigation starts. The other big thing to take away from here is we now have an expectation that before students start their own disciplinary hearings, they notify the Judiciary Committee and their regional director that they're going to do it. And so this is something I really need the regional directors to talk to their chapters about. Because in the past, and very frequently, chapters will do an entire disciplinary hearing and tell us when it's over. And most of the time they don't follow our policies, and most of the time the people that they've had in these disciplinary hearings are eligible to appeal. And even if they did the wrong thing, they won't be punished for it because the chapter failed to follow the procedures. So it's very important that RDs communicate to their chapters. If you have an incident, contact us first. We will walk you through it. Your chapter will not get in trouble for asking us a question about how to discipline a member. That's not what we're in the business of doing. And then the last piece that's most important to the RDs in here is the Judiciary Committee has written in policies that make sure that we notify you when an investigation is happening. So we're going to ask for a little bit of patience. This is going to take us some time culturally to get used to. But now the procedure is, if something is reported to us, our first step is to, at the minimum, notify the president and executive vice president. So at the minimum, somebody on the MT will know when an incident is reported. And generally what we're expected to do is notify the AVP and the RD. And we put this in as a control on our place, on ourselves, to make sure that we are communicating with you. And so this is something on our side we'll be following regularly. So those are kind of the three big takeaways from this. And then the last piece before we open it up to questions. And I appreciate everybody's patience, especially as I kind of get a lot of information compacted down very quickly, is kind of how we plan to roll this out. So we're doing the volunteer town hall right now, and then we're going to have another call that students are going to be invited to on October 25th. And this is how we'll push out a lot of information to our students. And then the ed team has done a phenomenal job of putting together a short and long-term plan on how we can educate members on what's going on here. And so you'll see these listed below, things like making sure members agree to the code of conduct, which at least provides a venue to read it, and then a whole bunch of videos and trainings. And these videos and trainings, they can be pushed out to students as regular learning, but the more important part is when an incident occurs, instead of needing to get on a phone call with the JC or get in a 10 email back and forth, we can send a video that says, before we get started, please watch this video. And that video in 2 minutes will explain what it normally takes us 6 emails to get to. And so we can all kind of be on the same common language before we start that email conversation. Again, we're driving towards making sure that RDs are getting this stuff off of their plate as quickly as possible, and it's not lingering. And so these steps are aimed at making sure that we're as efficient as possible when it comes to communication, so we can resolve these issues. So with that, I will now open it up to any questions that you all have, or any clarification that I need to provide.
So Christian, there was a question from Craig. It says, so if a chapter wants to hold a judicial review board, regardless of the issue, we need to notify. We've not done so in the past.
Yep. Yeah. So our expectation now with the code of conduct is that if a chapter wants to hold a disciplinary hearing, they need to, at the minimum, notify us that that disciplinary hearing is occurring. While this isn't in the question, I kind of want to describe why this is so important. There are 2 components. The first one I already spoke to, which is in the vast majority, if not all of the cases this year, chapters are not following our procedures. And so on the one hand, it's important they follow them because they're doing things like protecting individual rights. But on the other hand, that opens up the whole organization to a larger problem. Because if we're not requiring chapters to follow our policies, then when we do have a serious incident, people can come back and say, well, you didn't make these guys follow the policies. Why are you holding those policies for me as well? And that's a serious, I try not to use the term liability, but that's a serious liability issue for the fraternity as a whole. The second reason, which is also very important, is there are things that the fraternity is not equipped to handle. And because we are not equipped to handle them, we can't have a chapter doing a disciplinary hearing on it. So the typical thing I use is like assault. So the chapter is not equipped to handle like a disciplinary hearing on physical assault. We're not really in the business of doing that. That's other venues for that. And so what we don't want is the chapter to essentially turn into like a court of law and then publish things, and those things not be correct because the chapter doesn't have the training to execute them. Because then we're kind of on the hook for how we're going to handle that. And so that initial notification gives us the ability to reach out to the chapter and say, look, there's no such thing as a charge for punching somebody in the face in our organization, but there is a charge for embarrassing our organization. And so why don't we use that one instead to make sure that we're staying in line with our policies and within what we are allowed to investigate and discipline for. So sorry for that long answer, but that's really why it's important that those chapters are notifying us. And there's leeway, right? We know that this is just being published. We don't have an expectation that everybody's going to get it immediately, but we should be able to get there.
And that notification, sorry, real quick, just as a follow-up, can that come from the CA or would it be better to come from the students? I guess where would be the proper channel for that notification?
Yeah, so I'll tell you, the JC is not picky, and no matter what, our goal is for you to find out. So if it's coming through the CA, that's great for us because generally the CA already knows what's going on. So usually Craig can say, hey, we got this notification. Let me give you some background about these guys. That's very helpful for us. But if the preference is from an RD that you say, hey, report it directly to the JC and we'll resolve it on the back end, that's fine with us too.
Yeah, and just to kind of tag on to what Christian said too, it's the idea of all of this is to help everybody out. And I think Liz and Melinda can help confirm that as well, just over the little bit that we've been trying to do this. So it's different, but we're trying to make it easier and have like a one-stop shop situation where we can say, hey, this is what it is, and hopefully it will lessen the misinterpretation of policies as well for students. My biggest thing when I came onto the JC was, let's put this in common sense language, because I know when I served on the management team and as a CA, that wasn't the case. And so trying to make it easier for everybody is the goal of this.
Yeah, and if I could just share, like, I think that's like conduct. We the other thing that our risk management, risk insurance carrier has mentioned, that, you know, with this change, risk management is going away. It's conduct. I mean, so I think we really need to stress that everyone is responsible for their own individual conduct, the chapter's conduct, and that's what we're really going to try to focus. And one of the implementation steps is that we're going to really try to focus and weaving conduct into more like monthly, whether it's in a newsletter, a link to a resource, where it's not a once a semester, you know, where they would read the risk assurance and sign it, where this is in our everyday life, and that it's your conduct, it's your behavior, and move away from that. You know, if a student says, well, I have a risk management issue, you know, it's a conduct issue, and, you know, that's what we need for them to focus on.
Christian, there's a question in the chat. Will suspensions and expulsion procedures remain the same?
So this is a great question. I appreciate you asking this, because there is a change to this one. So I'm passionate about this, but I try to keep in mind that, like, not everybody wants to read an 11-page document. So I'm cognizant of the fact that, like, I'll try to draw your attention to the things that are really important. We have very much simplified the process for how to do a disciplinary hearing. And part of that was asking the serious question of, are the things in here truly necessary? One of the things that we used to have to do if you wanted to suspend or expel a member is the subcommittee that was the JRB or whatever we called it, they would have to vote unanimously to suspend or expel that member. And that created huge problems inside of the chapters. So we've changed that. That committee that's formed, their job is essentially a majority vote to decide what happens. Are they responsible, and what should we do about it? And then it goes to the regular chapter, and the chapter then does a vote as normal. So to answer your question, there is a modification. It's now easier for members to recommend suspension or expulsion of a member. This hasn't changed, but I want to let everybody know it's very important to understand that chapters cannot expel members from the organization. That is an authority held by the board of directors that they have not delegated. So if a chapter decides that they want to expel a member, it's really important that we catch that quickly and let them know you've provided a recommendation for expulsion. And until that happens, the member is going to retain their membership status unless the Judiciary Committee takes some extraordinary action, which we have, to temporarily suspend them. And then that ballot will go in front of the board of directors for final consideration. So yeah, just make sure we're clear about that. But long answer to your short question, but I hope that answers it. Yeah, we've cleaned up a lot of those procedures in here. Are there any other questions or things I can clarify? So
Christian, just for some clarification, because I love that if a chapter feels that it is something that they can handle with their JRB, and they notify you guys, which could be, you know, you, Carrie, Melinda, you know, anybody from the team, that conversation with the chapter on like procedures or what steps to take, who will be hosting those calls? Would it be someone from the JC, or would it maybe be a combination of their resource coordinator with their RD and with Melinda or something? Like, who would be on there to guide that chapter?
good question. So our preference is to defer to either the resource coordinator or the regional director. If I had it my way and I could do whatever I wanted, it would always be the RD, because we have a fear up at the JC that the more we interact directly with the chapter, the more authority we pull away from that RD every time we do it. And it's happened before, right? We've gotten in situations where chapters 6 months or a year later are still emailing the JC about questions. And we don't want to be in that position or be creating that. So it's kind of a work in progress. There are some people on this call who've already fallen under these procedures, and they know typically what we do is we cut out everybody except the RD, and we have a conversation with the RD and the EVP, president, and staff members that say, how do you, regional director and staff members, how do you want to handle this? We kind of get that consensus before we move forward. And then we cut the students back in and let them know what we plan to do from there.
Yeah, I gotta say, guys, if you build that great rapport with your chapters as chapter advisors and then so forth to the section directors and the regional directors, it does happen. Like I personally, because I was acting pseudo VP RD for a few regions for the last month or so, thank very much Coral and Melinda. We've had some chapters in the area I was looking over that were really great of reporting that forward or letting us know before they even took step number one. The best part about it is that it becomes such an educational moment for them, and not just an educational moment for them for AKSI, just for the world that they're going to be entering in the professional business environment because of these situations that will happen to them in the professional business environment as well, depending on what it is that they're speaking about, if it's conduct at a meeting or different things going on. So I do appreciate that they're having that conversation with us first, because for me personally, it was such an education moment, and continuing to build that trust and rapport between the student and yourself as a volunteer.
Yeah, we want to empower you. We want to empower the students to work with this, because we're a learning organization. We all develop throughout our time as members, whether it be as student members or alumni or volunteers. So this is another opportunity to do that, and just to kind of tag on to what Jackie had said too about it's an education moment. And personally for me, I'd rather have like a learning teaching moment versus a I have to come in and do an investigation moment.
And
yeah, if I can tag on, I was on that call with Jackie and Stephanie Potter, and it really, I meant to give you a shout out, Jackie, and I forgot to send it to Thomas, but it really was, I think that chapter was fearful, but it turned out to be just a great conversation, and Jackie and Stephanie both even turned it around to if they were in the business world. So that was a really a great call. So I think if we can have more of those, our students won't be per se afraid to about an item, maybe a risk or a conduct moment.
I will ask that. I know I've said if you don't take anything away from this other thing that if you don't take any away from it, take this away too. And I'll use Diana as our test case for this. A vast majority of things that happen inside your chapters and regions are not disciplinary issues. And Diana I'll use her as an example, but she does a great job of emailing us, and we tell her, this sounds like something you can handle. She says, yeah, this sounds like something I can handle. And it gets resolved in days, as opposed to our process, which takes months. And so, I really want to stress hey, open communication, because a majority of the time, our goal is just to give you the tools so that it can be resolved immediately. You can get it off your plate, and you can move on to all the other really important mentorship things that RDs are kind of empowered, but also trained and specialized to do. And we don't want to be a holdup on that mentorship. So if there's an opportunity for us to make sure we're not impeding your progress as mentors and coaches, we're going to take that avenue. So certainly, please don't hesitate to reach out to all of us about that. And then with my final words, I will say I've thanked a lot of people on this call, but my last thanks goes to Chrissy and Brian, who really helped us carry the ball when it came to the board of directors piece. There's a whole other echelon of governance and legal review that nobody wants to think about. And, I typically have to give a very big sigh before I start reading those emails, and they have made that so easy for us. This is a huge project. This has taken over 12 months for the board or for the Judiciary Committee to get through with the staff and the MT. So huge win for us, and really thanks to everybody I've mentioned for the team effort on getting this done.
Yeah, and a big thank you to Christian too, that helped write a lot of everything out in a way that is presentable, because a lot of the rest of us just have thoughts that come out in random spurts. So a big thanks to Christian on that as well.
Thanks. And I'm all set, so I don't want to take up any more time. Alyssa, we can turn back over to you.
Yeah, I will just wrap up and say thank you again to everybody. Thank you to Christian and Carrie and Melinda for joining us tonight on that specific topic. Again, we have our November town hall scheduled for the 10th. So if there's anything specific that you want covered in there, whether it's information-wise or as a breakout room, please feel free to reach out to me. My email is fm3@aksci.org. You can find me on the website, on the My AKSI community, all of those places. But again, thank you everybody for coming out tonight.